The cold bit through his skin like broken glass. Single dad Luke Carter was used to discomfort, but tonight was different. Snow fell like whispers from heaven, and his daughter Mia clung to his calloused hand as they crossed the parking lot. After his third janitor shift of the day, then he saw her barefoot, soaked, and trembling by the bus stop. Her makeup smeared, clothes torn, clutching a purse like it held her last breath. Without thinking, Luke peeled off his only winter jacket. "Here, you need it more," he said, draping it over her shoulders. She looked at him, startled, then whispered, "You have no idea what you just did." The next morning, police sirens surrounded Luke's apartment. Mia screamed as officers kicked the door in. And the woman he tried to help? Gone. No trace, no name, only his jacket. And a nationwide warrant for kidnapping a billionaire. Was Luke being framed? Or had he unknowingly become part of a billionaire's desperate escape plan? This is the story of one single father, one act of kindness, and the storm that followed. The bitter wind tore through the city streets like shards of ice, and Luke Carter pulled his thin jacket tighter around his lean frame. His boots crunched over the half-frozen pavement as he shuffled toward the bus stop. Mia's small hand curled tightly in his own. Snowflakes drifted lazily, but the cold was sharp, unforgiving, a relentless reminder that winter had settled deep into the bones of the city. Luke's breath came in ragged clouds, and every nerve in his body was alert, not just to the cold, but to the weight of exhaustion that dragged him down. 3 shifts, barely any sleep, and yet Mia's bright eyes kept him going. She tugged her threadbare scarf closer around her neck, shivering, and he swallowed the lump in his throat. He hated seeing her like this. At the edge of the bus stop stood a woman, alone, barefoot, her heels sinking into the snow, makeup smudged down her cheeks, hair tangled and dripping with frozen droplets. She looked utterly lost, fragile, desperate. Luke's heart skipped. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his tired voice breaking the silence. "Hey, you need this more than I do." He shrugged off his only jacket, the one Sarah had bought him before she died. "Here, take it." She looked at him, startled eyes wide, vulnerable. The cold didn't stop her trembling, but the jacket did. She whispered, "Thank you. You don't know what you just did." Luke hesitated, the wind howling around them, and in that moment, the world held its breath. Luke Carter wasn't always the tired janitor with worn boots and calloused hands. Once, he had dreams, big ones. A mechanic in the military, strong and steady, with a future laid out in neat, confident lines. But life doesn't follow blueprints. As the night swallowed the city, Luke sat in the dim kitchen of his small apartment, peeling a tired smile for Mia. She was fast asleep in her little bed, clutching a threadbare teddy bear. Luke's fingers traced the scar on his knuckle, a souvenir from years spent fixing engines under roaring plains, a symbol of a past life he rarely spoke of. He glanced at the faded photo taped to the fridge, a younger Luke, in uniform, standing next to a laughing woman with sparkling eyes, Sarah, his late wife. The love that gave him hope even in the darkest days. The truth was simple and brutal. Sarah had died giving birth to Mia. The hospital's mistake was a wound Luke bore silently, one that turned dreams into endless nights of work and a quiet determination to never let Mia feel alone. He wiped his hands on his pants and glanced at the clock. Tomorrow would bring another 12-hour shift, another struggle to keep the lights on and food on the table. But Luke was here for Mia, a man reshaped by loss, bruised but unbroken. A father fighting a battle no uniform could prepare him for. Luke's story didn't begin with a wife or a child. It began in a small, cold house where love was a stranger, and pain was a constant visitor. Growing up in foster care, the boy learned early that life could be unforgiving. His stepfather's shadow loomed large, angry, drunk, violent, and Luke often found himself hiding in the dark corners of his cramped room, clutching his fists to keep from crying out. "Son, you gotta be tougher than this," the man once snarled before the blow landed. But Luke's toughness wasn't born of strength. It was forged in silence. School was no refuge. Kids whispered about the bruises, the torn clothes, the boy who never had a father's warm hug. But Luke learned to fight, not with fists, but with stubbornness. To protect himself, he buried the hurt deep beneath layers of grit and quiet rebellion. He turned 18. The military became his escape route, a way out of the cycle he'd never asked for. It was there he found discipline, purpose, and for the first time, a sense of belonging. But even in the military, the scars of childhood followed him like ghosts. Luke never forgot where he came from. Every hardship he endured was a silent promise. To himself, when he became a father, his child would never know that kind of pain. He would break the chain. That promise was the anchor in the storm of his life. Sarah was the light Luke never saw coming. They met on a crisp autumn evening, under golden trees that painted the city in fire. She laughed like sunshine, a breath of hope after years of darkness. Luke, wary but drawn, found himself opening in ways he thought impossible. Sarah saw the man behind the scars, the tired janitor, the haunted soldier, and loved him anyway. For 2 years, they built a fragile happiness. Even the whispers of Luke's past seemed to fade beneath Sarah's gentle smile. Then came the day Mia was born, their miracle, a small bundle of breath and promise. Luke held Sarah's hand in the delivery room, eyes wide with awe, tears tracing lines down his cheek. Their family was whole, but fate had other plans. The hospital made a mistake. A nurse's oversight, a delayed response, and suddenly the life they fought for slipped away. Sarah's last words were a soft plea. Take care of her, both of them. Luke held her as she slipped into silence, his heart fracturing with each beat. The man who had conquered pain now faced a grief too deep to name. In the quiet that followed, Luke made a vow. No matter the cost, Mia would never lose her father's love. He would carry their light forward, even as the shadows threatened to consume him. Because some losses don't heal, they forge a new kind of strength. Luke stared at the faded wallpaper in his tiny apartment, the only home he could afford on his meager janitor's salary. The walls bore the marks of his struggle, crayon scribbles from Mia, a torn calendar with crossed-out days, reminders of every unpaid bill and sleepless night. Mia giggled from the small bed, clutching her worn teddy bear, her face lighting up the gray room like a burst of sunshine. Luke's chest tightened. She was the only reason he kept going. He cooked the little dinners he could, afford cheap pasta or canned soup, and told her stories of heroes and adventures, weaving worlds far from their reality. But behind the forced smiles, Luke felt the weight of every moment alone. The sleepless nights, the endless juggling of shifts, and the cruel loneliness of a father raising a daughter without a partner. Social workers came and went, questioning his ability to provide. Neighbors whispered behind curtains. Yet, Luke never faltered. I'm here, Mia, he whispered one night as she slept, brushing a stray curl from her face. I'm not going anywhere. His body ached from exhaustion, but his spirit burned fierce. Every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of their life. For Mia, he would fight every demon, every doubt, because being alone wasn't just survival, it was love in its rawest, fiercest form. The night after he gave away his jacket, Luke lay awake on the worn-out couch, the faint glow of a flickering street lamp casting long shadows across the room. Mia was asleep, peaceful for once, and Luke's mind raced in restless circles. Something wasn't right. Earlier that evening, as he locked up the janitor's closet, Luke noticed a pair of unmarked black cars idling near the parking lot entrance. Their windows were too dark, their engines too quiet. A knot tightened in his gut, the kind that warned you when danger was near but hidden. He brushed it off, telling himself he was just tired, imagining things. But then, the news broke. A woman Matching the description of the stranger he helped was plastered across every screen. Isla Devereux, billionaire heiress, missing for days, believed to be on the run from powerful enemies. The headlines were vicious, calling her a fugitive, a criminal, a mystery nobody dared approach. Luke's heart pounded as he stared, recognition sinking like ice. The woman who wore his jacket was at the center of a storm he never wanted to be part of. His phone vibrated relentlessly. Unknown number. No message. Outside, the unmarked cars were gone, but the feeling lingered. He was being watched. And whatever was coming next would change everything. Luke's footsteps echoed hollowly down the sterile corridors of the police station, each step heavier than the last. He clutched the thin piece of paper with Isla's description, his heart thundering in his chest. He wasn't a criminal, just a man who had tried to help. Sir, we've had multiple reports. You're the last person seen with Ms. Devereux before she disappeared, the officer said flatly, eyes cold and skeptical. Luke's voice cracked. I didn't know who she was. She was freezing out there. I gave her my jacket, that's it. But the system wasn't listening. They grilled him for hours, searching for inconsistencies, motives and connections. His military record was pulled apart, every scar and mistake twisted into suspicion. Social workers showed up, questioning if he was fit to raise Mia, a single dad with no support, struggling to survive. Luke sat in the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, feeling smaller than ever. How could kindness become a crime? How had the world turned so cold? Outside, Mia waited in a sterile foster care room, her small fingers clutching a blanket that didn't smell like home. Luke's mind shattered at the thought his daughter, taken while he was branded a suspect. The system had failed him, blind, harsh, and unforgiving. And Luke Carter knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let it break him. The cold metal cuffs snapped around Luke's wrists, like the final blow of a cruel fate. The courtroom was packed, cameras flashing, each click a nail in his coffin. The headlines had already decided. Luke Carter, accomplice to a fugitive, kidnapper of a billionaire heiress. Luke's protests echoed off the cold stone walls, but no one seemed to hear. His words were twisted, used against him as the prosecution painted a story of greed and deception. He looked across the room at Mia's empty seat. His heart shattered, the weight of helplessness crushing his chest. She was taken away the moment the police arrived, placed in foster care. Far from his arms, far from home. Late at night, in a cell too small for a man with so many dreams, Luke's thoughts spiraled. How had a simple act of kindness become a nightmare? The world spun away from him, leaving only doubt and despair. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Trust no one. The truth is darker than you think. Luke's fists clenched. He had to fight. For Mia, for his name, for the small shred of hope buried beneath the lies. But the road ahead was a dark one, filled with shadows that threatened to swallow him whole. The flickering glow of the television painted Luke's cell in blue and white as the news anchor's voice cut through the silence. Isla Devereux, heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the country, vanished 2 weeks ago after exposing her father's criminal empire. Her story is one of courage and danger. Luke's eyes narrowed. He had seen fear before, but what Isla lived through was something darker. Behind the headlines was a woman trapped in a war against the corrupt and powerful, a woman running, not just from enemies, but from a past that could destroy her. Leaked documents revealed her father's ruthless business dealings, ties to organized crime, and a family empire built on lies and violence. Isla had been the one to blow the whistle, knowing the price she'd pay. Luke stared at the screen, understanding at last the true storm he had stepped into. His jacket wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a lifeline, a symbol of trust. In a world that had turned against her, and now, that trust was being questioned, twisted into something dangerous. For Luke, the line between innocence and guilt blurred. The woman he tried to help was a fugitive, a whistleblower, and the key to a conspiracy that threatened to swallow them both. In that cold cell, Luke realized this wasn't just about a jacket. It was about survival and fighting a system that wanted to see them both fall. The morning light brought no relief, only harsh glare from the relentless media storm. Headlines screamed across billboards and social feeds. Janitor or criminal? Billionaire's accomplice or victim? Luke's name was dragged through the mud. At Mia's school, whispers followed her like a shadow. Parents exchanged knowing glances, teachers avoided eye contact. The little girl who once laughed freely now clutched her backpack tighter, her innocence chipped away by rumors she couldn't understand. Luke watched helplessly from a distance, his chest tightening. With every cruel word he overheard, the man who gave his jacket to a stranger was now painted as a villain, a grifter, a fraud, an opportunist. In the public eye, Luke was nothing more than a scapegoat, an easy target to distract from the scandal surrounding Isla Devereux. Inside his apartment, the walls seemed to close in. Every knock at the door made his heart race. Friends became distant, calls went unanswered, and loneliness wrapped around him like a suffocating cloak. But beneath the shame and humiliation, a fire burned. Luke refused to be broken by the world's judgment. He whispered to himself in the darkness, "I know the truth, and I'm not done fighting." Because when the world turns against you, sometimes the only thing left is the courage to stand tall, even when you're standing alone. One cold evening, as Luke sat alone at the kitchen table, a worn envelope slid beneath his apartment door like a whisper from the shadows. The paper was thick and unmarked, except for a single line scrawled in elegant handwriting. "I owe you the truth. Come alone." His heart pounded. For days he had felt the weight of uncertainty crushing him, but this was a spark. Inside the envelope, a small piece of paper held GPS coordinates and a time. Midnight, 3 days from now. Luke stared at the numbers, hands trembling. Who could have sent this? Isla? A friend? A trap? He thought of Mia, tucked safely in bed upstairs, her soft breathing a fragile tether to hope. This could be the break he needed, or the moment everything shattered. The night stretched long and heavy, filled with questions that had no answers, but Luke's resolve hardened. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Outside, the city's silence was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Luke grabbed his jacket, his old, worn jacket, and stepped into the cold night, the unknown pulling him forward like a magnet. In the depths of uncertainty, a father's courage would be tested, and a secret would finally be revealed. The road twisted through dense pine forests, snow muffling Luke's footsteps as he trudged toward the cabin perched like a secret in the mountains. His breath steamed in the freezing air, heart pounding with every step. He paused at the weathered door, hand trembling as he knocked softly. A moment later, it creaked open to reveal Isla, her eyes tired but fierce, wrapped in the jacket he'd given her, a lifeline in this frozen wilderness. "Luke," she whispered, voice cracked with exhaustion and relief. Inside, the cabin was sparse old wooden beams, a small fire crackling in the hearth. The weight of their shared silence filled the room. Isla's story poured out in fragments, her father's empire of crime, the threats that drove her into hiding, the betrayal of those she once trusted. She had escaped a cage far more dangerous than any prison cell. "You saved me," she said, voice breaking. Not just from the cold, from them. Luke felt a bitter mix of awe and fear. He had stepped into a world far beyond his own, tangled in shadows and lies. Yet, here they were, two strangers bound by a single act of kindness. Isla looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and pain. "There's no going back, Luke, but maybe together we can make them pay." Luke nodded, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his determined face. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred. The motel room was silent, but heavy thick with unspoken truth. The only sound came from the ticking wall clock, counting down the seconds before everything would change. Luke sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers locked tightly together, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. Isla stood in the corner, arms folded, her posture regal despite the exhaustion. She reached into her coat and pulled out a black envelope, placing it on the nightstand. "It's enough to buy your house back. Enough to fight for custody, get out of debt. Live," she said, her voice low. "You take that, walk away, and never say my name again." Luke didn't look at the envelope. He looked at her. "I don't care about the house, or the money. I care about Mia. I want my daughter back." Isla's lip quivered. "Then you'll lose everything." "I already did," he replied quietly. She sat beside him, their shoulders touched. "You gave me something no one ever has. A chance to feel human again." There was a long silence. Finally she stood. Her eyes welled. "I'll surrender. But on my terms. I need the world to hear the truth from me." Luke rose too. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I owe you that much." They didn't hug, didn't cry. Just stood still for a moment, two broken people, bonded by decency. Then Isla turned and walked out into the night, the city swallowing her whole. The door clicked shut behind her. Luke stood, motionless in the hollow motel room, staring at the black envelope she'd left. He didn't touch it. By the time he got back home, the sky was gray and wet. The house, if you could still call it, that was cold, half-packed from his last attempt to leave. He dropped his keys on the table, sank into the couch and let his body go limp. He called CPS that afternoon. "Any update on visitation?" he asked, hope clinging to his voice like frost. The woman on the other end sounded rehearsed. "Mr. Carter, given your recent entanglements with a fugitive, the review board has decided to extend the no-contact period. I was never charged. It's not just legal, it's perception." Click. The silence that followed was deafening. For days, Luke wandered the house like a ghost. He didn't shave, didn't eat. He kept Mia's room untouched, the unicorn stickers still on the walls, the tiny pink socks in her drawer. He'd sit on her bed and stare at the empty space where she used to sit brushing her doll's hair. At night, he'd dream of Isla disappearing into the dark, of Mia crying out his name, of courtrooms and cameras and judgments he couldn't defend himself against. One morning, he looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. "I did the right thing," he whispered to the reflection. "Didn't I?" But even the mirror had no answer. It happened on a Tuesday. Luke hadn't left the house in days. The TV had been nothing but background noise until he heard her voice.